I got pregnant and ran after breaking up with Mark. For years later, I was suffering through a brutal heat when my son came running up to me, all excited. "Daddy, I found an alpha for you." I took a closer look and my world went dark. He hadn't just found an alpha. He'd found his own father. The weather was brutally humid, and the back of my neck was burning up. My scent gland was abnormally swollen. That could only mean one thing: my heat was coming. I clocked out of work early, not even stopping to pick up my son, and rushed home. I was an Omega who had been transported into this world. Other than me, no one in this world had a secondary gender. That meant there were no suppressants to help me get through my heat. Other people could smell my pheromones, but they weren't affected by them. The elevator filled with the scent of orange blossoms. I clutched the back of my neck, leaning against the wall, slick with sweat. The person next to me, overwhelmed by the potent scent, frowned and complained. "Who wears that much perfume? It's suffocating." Hearing that, I tried to shrink into myself, reining in my scent as best I could. By the time I stumbled out of the elevator, I was soaked in sweat. My body was slick and damp, and my legs were as weak as noodles, barely holding me up. When I finally made it to my apartment, I collapsed onto my bed, burying my face in the covers, gasping for air. The room smelled not only of my orange blossoms, but also of a woody fragrance. On the nightstand was a nearly empty bottle of cologne. I had secretly taken it when I left Mark Cole 4 years ago. It was the same cologne he always wore, and it served as a perfect substitute for an alpha scent. Come to think of it, my heat probably started early today because of that woody fragrance. I ran into Mark today. After 4 years, Mark seemed even more handsome. When I saw him, he was on the phone, a cold expression on his face. Even though our breakup wasn't my fault, my heart started pounding. Just as I was about to turn and walk away, he hung up and called out to me, "Leo, come here." As if I had no control over my own body, I walked toward him. 4 years, and he was still loyal to that woody cologne. Smelling that familiar scent on him, my racing heart began to calm down. He gripped my jaw. "Can we stop this nonsense? Come home with me." I was the one who broke up with him. I was the one who blocked him. And after 4 years, he thought I was just throwing a tantrum. Even so, he hadn't once tried to coax me back in all that time. If he had, maybe I wouldn't have left. His grip was a little tight, and I frowned. He immediately softened his hold, his thumb stroking my cheek. The atmosphere suddenly felt like old times. I glanced up at him, and the trace of tenderness in his eyes made me dizzy. My heartbeat went haywire, and my scent began to leak out. To keep it from spiraling out of control, I quickly looked away. "I don't know you." I slapped his hand away and turned to leave. The woody scent was too familiar. Just a brief exposure had my gland burning. It wasn't even a real pheromone, but it was enough to trigger my heat. "Andy, you'll have to come home by yourself later and pick up dinner on the way." I took out my phone and sent a voice message to my son's smartwatch. A moment later, Andy replied, his bright, childish voice coming from the phone. "Daddy, is your heat here again?" After I arrived in this world, my son was the only one who believed I was an Omega from another place. Even Mark, the man who got me pregnant, always just thought I was losing my mind. "Yeah. So you're on your own for dinner. Be safe on your way home." Ever since I was pregnant with him, Andy has been an easy kid. When it came to scents, mine was usually enough to soothe him. He still craved an alpha father scent, but a spritz of that cologne would always calm him down. He's been friends with everyone in the neighborhood since he was little, a total social butterfly. So even when I was busy with work, he could get himself home from kindergarten and grab dinner. After making sure he was safe, I burrowed back under the covers. A fire was raging inside me, the heat spreading through my limbs. I couldn't help but think of Mark from this morning. It was all his fault. If it weren't for him, my heat wouldn't have come early. The heat was unbearable, so I had to find another way. Cold water flowed from the tap, gradually filling the bathtub. Sinking into the cold water, I let out a sigh of relief as the chill instantly drove away the burning. But it wasn't long before the heat crept back. I held my breath and submerged myself completely, letting the cold envelop me. A moment later, I heard Andy's voice from outside. "Daddy, I'm home. I found an alpha for you." That kid must have been secretly listening to ABO audiobooks online again. Besides me, there were no other alphas or omegas in this world. I ignored him, popping my head out of the water for a quick sigh before sinking back down. I had barely been under for a second when the bathroom door burst open with a bang. Andy's panicked voice followed.
Ah, Daddy.
Don't do anything crazy. I poked my head out of the water, but before I could explain, he had already vanished. This kid. 1 second he's telling me not to do anything rash, and the next he's gone. His voice, muffled, came from outside. What do I do? My daddy's trying to end it all. He's just sitting in the water. I couldn't tell if he was on the phone or talking to someone. Andy. After a long moment, I heard footsteps outside, but they didn't sound like a child's light patter. They were heavy, steady steps. Oh no, what Andy just said. It couldn't be true, could it? He didn't actually just drag some random guy off the street, did he? The next moment, a familiar voice sounded from the bathroom doorway. Leo, get up. Before I even saw him, I smelled that woody fragrance that haunted my dreams. I looked up and saw the culprit who'd triggered my early heat, Mark, standing in the doorway. He seemed to have actually believed Andy, his face etched with unconcealed worry. How did he know Andy was connected to me, and how did he find this place so precisely? The thought that he had met Andy, and that they had come back here together, made my heart skip a beat. I scrambled to my feet, dripping wet, and wrapped a towel around myself. What are you doing here? He stepped closer, and the woody scent intensified. Smelling him, my glands seemed to ache even more, and my head spun from the fever. He backed me against the wall. Your heat's here? He asked. Can you stand? Do you want me to carry you? I don't need your help. I snapped, pushing him with all my might. He didn't budge. Instead, he grabbed my wrist. I don't know if it was my imagination, but the woody scent seemed to get stronger. His scent was luring me in, and I couldn't stop myself from leaning closer. I thought you didn't believe I was an omega. The memory stung. I met him right after I arrived in this world and stayed by his side for over 6 months. But Mark never believed I was an omega, not even when I went into heat. I don't, he said, his hand reaching for the back of my neck. The moment he touched my sensitive gland, a tingling numbness shot through me. Before I could react, my feet left the floor. You jerk, Mark, taking advantage of me when I'm weak. The heat made my head swim, and as he lifted me, I couldn't struggle at all. When he tossed me onto the bed, a sliver of clarity returned. My voice trembled. Andy's still here. He paused, then got up and walked out of the room. I let out a sigh of relief and buried myself under the covers again. A few moments later, the footsteps returned. Mark, I don't need you. Just go. Remembering how he'd said he didn't believe me made my teeth ache with frustration. If only omegas could mark people. I'd mark Mark and see if he still didn't believe me then. Oh, then I'll leave? He stopped by the bed, his back to me. He's leaving? But what about my heat? A breakup is a breakup, and being angry is one thing. But with no suppressants and no alpha, I couldn't afford to lose my only tool. Mark, you. When I woke up 3 days later, the first thing I saw was a certain someone sleeping soundly beside me. Feeling refreshed, I got out of bed, rubbing my sore waist as I looked at the still sleeping Mark. In some ways, Mark was pretty useful. At least now, I didn't have to suffer through the misery of my heat. I hadn't seen much of Andy for the past 3 days. After washing up, I went to look for my son. I searched everywhere but couldn't find him. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. I thought back to that night. Mark had left the room and come back, and then it was just a blur of us tangled together in the dark. I hadn't had a chance to even notice what Andy was doing outside. Mark, where's my son? I shook Mark awake, grabbing his shoulders. His eyes were bleary with sleep, his hair a mess. He looked nothing like his usual cool, aloof self. There was a bite mark on his collarbone that I'd left yesterday, and the sight of it made my face burn. Mark said calmly he went home. Home? What other home did Andy have besides this one with me? There was only one possibility. Mark knew Andy was his son, too. This was bad. I had spent 4 years painstakingly hiding, only to have it all ruined by one heat. Give me my son back. I couldn't live without Andy. In this world, he was the only one who believed me unconditionally. Who else would? Without him, I had no other connection to this world. I came to this world after a car accident. I was on my way to the airport when our car was hit. My head slammed into the seat in front of me, and I blacked out. When I opened my eyes, I was in the arms of a strange man, his car also part of the crash, still at the scene. There was blood on his temple, and his brow was furrowed. "Are you okay?" He didn't seem at all surprised that I had suddenly appeared in his arms. Before I could ask him anything, I passed out again. When I opened my eyes again, all I saw was white. I sat up, and a sharp pain shot through my head, making my vision go black. Just as I was about to fall, a large hand steadied me. I looked up. It was the man I'd seen before I passed out. He was still here. How strange. Why wasn't he curious about how I ended up in his arms? I didn't even know the answer myself. But I was very curious. "What time is it?" I asked, rubbing my temples. The man told me a time that was completely unfamiliar. A wave of panic hit me. Where am I? An unfamiliar time, plus suddenly appearing in a stranger's arms. As a connoisseur of web novels, I quickly guessed what might have happened. The man paused, then answered Earth. I was speechless. After a moment of silence, I took the initiative. "I'm an Omega." The man's scent was so well controlled that I couldn't smell a thing, even up close. A little disappointing. An alpha's scent, besides being suppressive, is the best medicine for an Omega. I was hoping he could help me with my headache. "Are you a beta?" I asked tentatively. The man didn't answer. He just walked to the head of the bed and pressed the call button. "Who are you?" When he didn't answer, I didn't mind and just kept asking. "Mark Cole." "So, are you a beta?" I couldn't help but ask again. Mark glanced at me, a strange look in his eyes. A second later, I heard his calm voice. "No, I'm human." My suspicion was soon confirmed. I had transmigrated. And I had transmigrated to a world where secondary genders hadn't evolved yet. I couldn't smell Mark's scent, nor that of the nurse. I whispered to Mark, "You guys don't have secondary genders in this world?" "I don't know." For some reason, Mark always looked at me with a frown, a hint of helplessness in his eyes. In this world, I didn't know anyone but Mark. When I was discharged, it was only natural that I went home with him, and I became dependent on him. A lone man, and a lone Omega, inseparable, plus the sudden arrival of my heat. Mark and I quickly got together. He usually seemed quiet and reserved, but during my heat, he held me and comforted me constantly. He'd say all sorts of things that made my heart melt and my face flush. Even knowing he wasn't an alpha, I still begged him to bite my gland. "Are you sure you want this?" he asked, but he bit my gland anyway. It was a strange feeling. The woody cologne he wore clung to me like a real scent, easing my discomfort. We dated like that for over 6 months, until I discovered the secret Mark was hiding. I accidentally opened a cabinet in Mark's house. Inside, there was an array of baby supplies. Next to them was a children's photo album. I didn't dare look through it closely. After a quick glance at the birth photo on the first page, I put it back with trembling hands. Mark had a child, but I had never seen his other half. The baby supplies and photo album weren't definitive proof that Mark had a child. The stuff in the cabinet. "Is it for your child? Mark, do you have a kid?" When I confronted him, he just frowned, offering no explanation. If he had just explained, I might have believed him. After all, I was an Omega. His woody scent could soothe me, and he could help me through my heat. Besides, in this strange world, he was the only person I knew, the only one I was familiar with. I didn't want to lose the sense of security he gave me, but he didn't offer a single word of explanation. That day, I broke up with Mark and moved out. Ironically, not long after, I found out I was pregnant. To keep Mark from finding out about the baby, I hid. Men in this world couldn't get pregnant. If I was discovered, what if he sent me for surgery or to be studied? I gave birth in an unlicensed clinic and raised the baby on my own. But just 4 years after leaving, not long after my son started kindergarten, Mark found me. "You have your own kid, so why are you trying to steal mine?" Unable to break free from Mark's grip, I could only resort to biting to vent my frustration. A new, bloody bite mark soon appeared on his shoulder. He didn't even flinch. With one hand holding my wrist, he reached for his phone with the other. He simply said, "Leo's awake," and hung up. Who was he telling I was awake? I barely knew anyone in this world. The only people I was close to were my son and the man in front of me, Mark. I looked at him warily. Who were you talking to? You don't need to know. Mark let go of my hand and checked the bite marks on his arm with his phone. I heard him murmur, "Good teeth." My face suddenly flushed. I changed the subject. Aren't you curious how I have a son? He glanced at me. Didn't you say you're an Omega? Oh, so now he believed I was an Omega. Wait, doesn't that mean he thinks Andy is his and my child? Andy is not your son. I lied through my teeth. He gave me a flat look, then got out of bed and walked out of the room without a word. For some reason, I felt a little guilty, afraid he already knew. I pressed on. You have a son too, don't you? So we're even. He stopped. Who told you that? Before I could say another word, Andy's voice came from outside. Daddy, how are you feeling? The moment he appeared in the doorway, Mark casually scooped him up. Andy wrapped his arms around Mark's neck familiarly. Mark carried him to my bedside and patted his shoulder. Mark then placed him in my arms. Neither of them said a word, but they seemed to know exactly what the other was thinking, acting with a startling familiarity. Daddy? Andy's voice broke through my scattered thoughts. I'm fine, sweetie. I kissed his cheek. Have you had breakfast? Not yet. Andy shook his head, planting a slobbery kiss on my face. What do you want to eat? Mark suddenly asked from the side. I'll cook. I gave him a suspicious look. For years, and now Mark could cook? Andy shouted, seafood congee. Then he added brightly, the food Uncle makes is the best. Did I hear that right? What did Andy just call Mark? It was the weekend, so Andy didn't have school. All day, I watched Andy's little mouth, listening to him call Mark uncle. Daddy, you've been staring at me all day, Andy mumbled. I guess I must have misheard. Ever since my heat, Mark had been living at my place, and I couldn't get rid of him. I don't know what kind of spell he cast on Andy, but my son insisted he stay. After another failed attempt to kick Mark out, I was getting a headache from both of them. Why don't you just go home with him and be his son? No way. Andy hugged my leg. Andy and Mark exchanged a look. Then Mark spoke up. I don't have another child. If we're together, Andy will be my son. Not interested, I said, rejecting him flatly. Andy had me as his dad, and that was enough. Besides, Mark never believed I was an Omega. He probably thought Andy was my son with some other woman. If I couldn't get rid of him, I'd just have to ignore him. I was getting ready to go to the hospital for a checkup. Ever since my heat, I'd been having headaches. I didn't know if it was because of those two or if I was getting migraines. Daddy, where are you going? I'll go with you, Andy said, trotting after me. You stay here. I turned and crouched down to face my son, noticing Mark was following too. I pointed at my son, signaling for Mark to take him back to my apartment. For now, he didn't seem like he would try to take Andy away by force. Left with no other choice, I had to let him watch Andy for me. After ruffling my son's hair, I stood up, but my vision suddenly went black, and I felt dizzy and unsteady. I heard my son's anxious voice and the sound of frantic footsteps. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. In a hazy state between sleep and waking, I could hear voices, faint and unreal. Are we really not allowed to tell Daddy? Andy's voice sounded sad. But if we do it this way, what if it never what? Who was he talking to? Was he hiding something from me? Tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt incredibly heavy. Don't overthink it, sweetie. That voice was so familiar. I tried to place it and realized it was Mark's. Why was he calling my son sweetie so affectionately? Could it be that he knew everything? What if Mark took my son away while I was unconscious? I forced my eyes open, my heart pounding. When I opened my eyes, I was met with two faces, one large and one small, looking strikingly similar. Even at his young age, Andy's face was full of sorrow and worry. Mark was still frowning, his expression unreadable. Daddy, how are you feeling? Andy's big eyes were brimming with tears. I squeezed his little face. Daddy's fine. Other than a headache, there was nothing else wrong with me. When I was discharged, I tried to take my son home, but Mark stopped me. Mr. Cole, what do you think you're doing? Mark held my arm with one hand, then leaned through the car window and pulled out a file. I looked closer. It was a DNA test report. Mark, what's the meaning of this? I held Andy's hand tightly, terrified that Mark would snatch him away in the blink of an eye. "It's the paternity test results for me and your son," he said calmly, placing Andy's little backpack in the car. "Since you won't accept being with me, let's just use evidence." I didn't even need to open it. I knew exactly what the results would show. The secret I had hidden for 4 years was exposed by a single, flimsy piece of paper. My breath caught, and it took me a moment to process. I lowered my gaze, suddenly unable to meet Mark's eyes. "My son isn't yours. Don't you have another kid? Why are you trying to take my son from me?" Thinking of the baby things I'd seen at his house, a surge of confidence returned. I wasn't the one who had been hiding things in this relationship. Mark should be the one feeling guilty. In the end, I went back to Mark's house with Andy. As soon as we walked in, Andy familiarly took a pair of slippers from the shoe cabinet in the entryway. "Daddy, here." The slippers didn't look new, and next to them were 2 other pairs, one large and one small, in the same style. Clearly a matching family set. They must belong to Mark's other child. A wave of revulsion washed over me, and I wanted to turn and leave. But Andy seemed to really like Mark, and he had seen the paternity test. He knew Mark was his other father. Looking at the slippers in Andy's hand, I had a change of heart. No, I had to stay. I needed to see whose kid all this baby stuff belonged to. I said to Mark, "I want a new pair." Andy, holding the slippers, froze, his little face clouding over with sadness again. I quickly knelt down to comfort him. "Look at Mark. He invites us to stay but shows no sincerity. He won't even buy us a new pair of slippers." I tossed the slippers he was holding aside. Andy nodded, burying his face in my neck and rubbing against me. "Make do for now. I'll have someone buy new ones," Mark said, picking up the slippers again. I reluctantly put them on and found they fit perfectly. So did the pair on Andy's feet. It was as if these 2 pairs of slippers had belonged to us all along. Mark's assistant quickly delivered new slippers. But why were there 3 matching pairs again? I had Andy change into his first. For some reason, the kid was attached to the old pair, a look of reluctance on his face. "Do you like the design?" I asked him gently, changing into my new pair as well. Andy nodded. "I like it. Then when we go home, Daddy will buy you another pair with the same design. Okay?" The easy-to-please child immediately beamed. After placating Andy, I looked up and saw the person who was supposed to be cooking still standing next to us. "Weren't you going to cook?" I was actually curious to see what culinary skills Mark had picked up in the last 4 years. "Yeah." Mark nodded, crouching down to unwrap the new pair of slippers on the floor. "Why are you changing with us?" I said, annoyed. I had no desire to wear matching anything with Mark. Mark said flatly they were old. Without waiting for me to reply, he walked to the kitchen. While Mark was cooking, I wandered around his house, a place both familiar and strange. The furniture was arranged just as it had been when I lived here, even the placement of the water glasses. Everything was the same except for that cabinet full of baby supplies. It was as if, for the past 4 years, Mark couldn't let me go. But didn't Mark have another child? Why was he putting on this lovesick act for me? I heard the sound of Andy's slippers shuffling around the house. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw his small figure tiptoeing to reach for the cabinet I had accidentally opened before. I frowned and walked over quickly. Andy had a pack of fruit jelly in his mouth. Seeing me approach, he pulled another one out of the cabinet. "Daddy, here," he said, offering it to me like a prize. I didn't take it. "Andy, what have I taught you?" I asked sternly. "Is it okay to just rummage through other people's things in their house? Did you even ask before you started eating his food?" The cabinet I had been deliberately ignoring was now wide open, thanks to Andy. And not only had he opened it, he was eating things from inside. It was one thing for Mark to have another child, but I hadn't even taught my own son properly. A sense of failure washed over me. I took the unopened pack of jelly from Andy's hand and tossed it back into the cabinet. The cabinet door clicked shut, and my emotions finally settled. I looked down and saw Andy's downturned mouth and glistening tears. The sound of his suppressed sobs filled the air. My heart clenched. I had just realized how out of control I'd been. "Sweetie," I choked out. "I'm so sorry." He must have been terrified by my outburst. He just cried and cried, even as I held him. His soft sobs reminded me of how fragile he was when he was just born. Mark took Andy to comfort him. I sat alone in front of that cabinet, feeling a sense of strangeness. Ever since my heat, things had been so bizarre. Why did Mark know he could find me by following Andy home? Why were Andy and Mark so close? As if Andy had grown up by his side. Andy got along well with the other kids in our neighborhood, but he'd never been so obviously dependent on anyone but me. There were too many strange things. The baby supplies in Mark's house, and the child I had never seen. And the way Mark always looked at me, with his furrowed brow and the undeniable helplessness in his eyes. Was it me? Or had Mark known about Andy for 4 years and been meeting him in secret behind my back? But Andy was just a kid. How could he keep a secret like that? A sharp pain shot through the side of my head, and my vision went black. Took a long time for the feeling to pass before I slowly stood up. I wondered if Andy was still crying. I was really too harsh on him just now. I shouldn't have been like that. Grabbing an empty glass as an excuse to get water, I walked resolutely toward the kitchen. The whir of the range hood filled the air. Mixed with Mark's deep voice, I could hear Andy's childlike tone, thick with nasality. I carefully peeked through the kitchen's glass door, trying to hear what they were saying. The range hood was too loud, and I couldn't hear clearly. Looking through the glass, I saw that Andy had stopped crying, but his little eyebrows were furrowed like tiny waves. At such a young age, he had already picked up Mark's frown. I don't want to do this anymore, Andy said, pouting. Mark wiped the tears from the corner of his eye. Sweetie, don't be anxious. Amnesia doesn't get better that quickly. Amnesia. The word hit me like a ton of bricks, leaving me dizzy. With a crash, the glass in my hand fell to the floor, my mind consumed by that single word. The kitchen door was yanked open, and 2 strikingly similar faces, one large and one small, appeared before me. Leo. Daddy. I stared at them blankly as a piercing pain shot through my head. I have amnesia? Looking back, everything seemed to make sense. The closeness between Mark and Andy, the perfectly fitting slippers at Mark's house, the unchanged decor, and that cabinet full of baby supplies. All the signs were there, but I didn't know which memories I had lost. I remembered everything so clearly. I remembered my past with Mark, how I was pregnant and gave birth to Andy all alone. And I remembered everything that had happened since we met again. My thoughts were a tangled mess, and the diagnostic report was nearly crumpled in my hand. Andy gently took it from me and carefully smoothed it out. Mark explained that I had amnesia combined with memory distortion. You're saying my transmigration was fake? My head felt like it was going to explode. And we've been married for 6 years? I thought I had transmigrated to another world, gotten pregnant, and run away after finding out Mark had a child. How did that turn into me being a married Omega with amnesia? He pulled me into his arms, his large hand massaging my temples. Yes, that's what happened, Mark nodded. His expression was calm. He turned to Andy. Sweetie, go get the little red books from the bedroom. Andy quickly disappeared from sight, but I really can't remember any of it. The more I tried to think, the more my head throbbed. I only remembered the car crash, waking up in Mark's arms. Then I went home with him. After we got together, I found that cabinet. So I broke up with him, ran away while pregnant, and hid for 4 years until Mark found me. But now Mark was telling me that all those memories were wrong. Only the memory of the car crash was real. You're not lying to me, are you? Mark sighed helplessly. What would be the point? Would I make our son sad just for that? I thought about it, and he had a point. In the time since my heat, it was obvious Mark was a good dad. Andy relied on him, too. Even just now, when I made him cry, he needed Mark to comfort him. Andy came trotting back, holding 2 small red books. I took one and saw a photo of me and Mark. The marriage registration date was 6 years ago. Mark wasn't lying, but it all still felt foreign to me. I searched my mind blankly, but I couldn't find any of these memories. My mind was too chaotic, so I took a leave of absence from work. After dropping our son off at kindergarten, I went back to Mark's house. There were so many things there from our life together. Maybe looking at them would jog a memory or two. Thought Mark would be at work, but when I opened the door, I found him sniffing a piece of clothing. What are you doing? I looked closer. The piece of clothing in his hand was the pajamas I had changed out of this morning. Did my amnesia turn Mark into a pervert? He looked completely unfazed. Doing laundry. With that, he walked toward the washing machine. But he was only holding one piece of clothing. The air was thick with a woody scent. I followed him. Why are you wearing so much cologne? I liked it, but it was so strong that it made my gland burn and my legs go weak. Mark tossed the clothes in. Your scent is pretty strong, too. The woody fragrance made me dizzy, and all I wanted to do was press myself against him. Mark reached out and touched my neck. In heat again, I paused. No, it's just your cologne is too strong, I mumbled. I sniffed for a long time, but I couldn't detect his pheromones. Only that woody scent. Where's your scent? What does it smell like? Mark, who was carrying me toward the bedroom, stopped and looked down at me. It's not cologne, Leo, he said, his voice laced with exasperation. This is my scent. His scent. So the woody fragrance I thought was cologne was actually Mark's scent. I suddenly remembered that nearly empty bottle of perfume. Then, that bottle of cologne? Mark said calmly. Scent extract. I was instantly wide awake, staring at him, dumbfounded. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Scent extract is drawn directly from the gland with a needle, and the gland is one of the most sensitive parts of the body. Accidentally scratching it with a fingernail is painful, let alone having a needle stuck into it to draw out fluid. I gently touched him. Did it hurt? Mark shook his head. It didn't hurt. I'm sorry. I still can't remember. I nuzzled his cheek with my nose. It's okay, Leo. As he laid me down on the bed, I felt that something about it was different. Wait, I said, pushing against Mark. What's wrong? Mark's breathing was a little ragged. The intense woody scent enveloped me, making my own breath quicken. I turned my head and saw the bed was covered in all sorts of things. I grabbed one at random. It was one of my shirts. I grabbed another. It was a towel I used. And it wasn't just that. The entire 2-meter bed was piled high. I remembered the scene when I first got home. Mark sniffing my pajamas. A bold guess popped into my head. Mark, I said, holding his head as he nuzzled against me. Are you in your rut? After a long moment, I heard him respond. It's my rut. I asked cautiously, then are you nesting? The rest of my words were smothered by his kiss, and my breath was stolen away. The alpha's rich woody scent completely enveloped me. I gritted my teeth and sat up, rubbing my lower back. Beside me, the culprit was still not satisfied. No more. An alpha's rut was terrifying. My whole body felt like it was about to fall apart. My scent gland was covered in fresh bite marks. Mark paid me no mind, his nose brushing against the side of my neck. I tried to push him away, but it was no use. Then I remembered our son would be home from school soon. Get up, our son is getting out of school, I said, batting at his head. Feathery kisses landed on my neck. Mark was in no hurry. His grandma is picking him up. I'm still not doing it again, I said, on the verge of tears as he pushed me back down. Mark pressed down on me, his voice hoarse. Leo, do you remember yet? Hearing that, I tried hard to recall. Memories flashed through my mind like a movie reel, too fast to catch. I shook my head, lost and confused. I can't remember. Then let's continue, Mark said, his lips descending on mine again. Maybe you'll remember this time. By the time I saw my son again, it had been 3 days. Daddy, do you remember yet? Andy looked at me with hopeful eyes. He kicked off his slippers and climbed onto the bed. Daddy said he was giving you treatment. Hearing that, I shot a glare at Mark. What nonsense was he spouting? Not yet, I said, rubbing my son's chubby little face, afraid of disappointing him. Andy smiled. That's okay, Daddy. Take it slow, Mark added. Mark got out of bed to make dinner. I snuggled with my son, lying back on the bed. I breathed in Andy's milky scent, surrounded by the woody fragrance that filled the bed. An unprecedented sense of peace filled my heart. Staring at his serene, sleeping face, images suddenly flashed through my mind, one after another. Andy seemed to have turned back into a baby, cooing in my arms. Mark came in from outside, bent down and picked him up. A moment later, the baby was back beside me, along with Mark. The scene shifted and Mark was younger. He was in a school uniform, standing tall and full of life. He was on a bicycle, and on the back seat sat a version of me, also in a school uniform. Many other fragmented scenes surfaced in my mind. Some I couldn't grasp, some I could. Bits and pieces, slowly piecing together the story of how Mark and I met, fell in love, and got married. Before I could think further, I heard frantic shouts, full of anxiety. Leo, Leo? Daddy, wake up! I frowned, struggling to open my heavy eyelids. A tear-streaked face crashed into my chest, and I held my soft son tightly. I looked at Mark, whose eyes were filled with worry. I'm fine, I just fell asleep. But I think I remembered some things. Hearing this, Mark let out a sigh of relief and rubbed his temples. He leaned in, kissed me, and then kissed Andy. Don't rush it. As long as you remember me and our boy, that's enough. Don't think too hard, just enjoy the present. Andy tilted his head up, his tear-stained cheek pressing against mine. Daddy, you just need to remember me and Daddy. I remember, I said, stroking the back of his head. Their comfort gradually calmed me down. Just as they said, there's no rush. I love Mark and my son, and they both love me. One day, I'll remember everything. Mark's epilogue. After the car accident, my wife's memory became distorted. He thought he had transmigrated here, that he was the only Omega in the world. To play along, I suppressed my scent and briefed the doctors and nurses. He forgot how we met, how we fell in love, our daily life together. He forgot our son was 5 years old. He forgot. Leo remembered nothing, and his memories were all mixed up. The doctor told me not to push him, to let him recover slowly. What could I do? I could only play along with his story. He asked if I was a beta. He had forgotten I was an alpha, too. He had forgotten me completely. It was more than a little infuriating, but I felt helpless. He forgot our son, so I had my mom take Andy to live in the house that was registered under Leo's name. I was still trying to figure out how to get him to live with me, but he ended up becoming dependent on me on his own. As I thought, deep down, my wife still loves me. So even in his jumbled memories, we still fell in love. Everything was heading in the right direction. I imagined that one day, when he had gradually recovered, I would suddenly tell him we have a 5-year-old son. He'd be so shocked, but I couldn't control how things unfolded. He found the things we used for the baby, stored in a cabinet. He thought I had another child and insisted on breaking up with me. I was tempted to just tell Leo the truth about his amnesia. I was tired of playing this game, and I hated that my son couldn't see both of us every day. But the doctor's words echoed in my mind. Because of the baby supplies, Leo moved out. He moved back to the house in his name, which was where Andy was staying. He must have been so worked up by what he thought was true that he fainted again. The family doctor came, and not long after, Leo woke up. When he woke up, he believed he was an Omega who had run away while pregnant and had been in hiding for 4 years. This was better, in a way. I hadn't known how to script roles for my mom and son in Leo's distorted reality, but he had written the script himself. With no other choice, I moved into the apartment across from his, hiding from him every day while secretly keeping in touch with our son. Thankfully, Andy is a smart, good boy. He was more than happy to help take care of his dad with the mixed-up memories. The only thing was that he'd sneak off to find me every day and cry because his daddy still hadn't remembered. Leo's heat started, and our son let me know. He knew what was what. He thought he was the only Omega in the world, which meant I was the only one who could help him. So he didn't turn me away. After his heat, I decided I couldn't keep boiling the frog slowly like this. I could wait, but our son couldn't. He'd cry in his sleep during naps at my place, begging for Leo's memory to come back. After consulting the doctor, I started to give Leo some gentle stimulation. I showed him the paternity test for me and Andy, brought them both back to our house, and as luck would have it, I went into a sudden rut, something that hadn't happened in a long time. Maybe it was the effect of my scent, or maybe it was the mating marks. Leo said he remembered a little. As I knew, my wife really does love me. The moment my scent entered him, his body remembered our past. And he even remembered our son as a baby. Still, I told him to take it slow, not to rush. That's what the doctor said, too. We have the rest of our lives, and Andy is still little. If he can't remember, it doesn't matter. We have so much of a future ahead of us. There's no need to get stuck on the past.